We are out in the Dugald area today, soil sampling, so we're just gonna let the video run, and yeah, you can basically follow along, follow my musings, and see what soil sampling is all about. So this is a field that is new to us in terms of soil sampling, so we are setting up some new points. We are taking samples that are 0 to 6, and then 6 to 24, so we've got 2 depths. It's kind of the industry standard. We have a hydraulic probe inside the cab, so you might be able to see underneath us, but we've got a hole in the floor of the truck. The probe is probably about 30 inches. That way it allows us to do a full 24-inch depth. And then we're splitting these samples off into the buckets, 2 samples. So we got a bigger bucket for the subsoil and then a smaller bucket for the topsoil. How do we measure our 0 to 6? I'm a few years into my career of soil sampling, and I've taken the approach to, I'm not wearing a glove today, but I will often mark out, I know that from the tip of my index finger to about the end of my palm, or the crease here, is roughly 6 inches. So this is how I measure the depths that I'm using. It allows us to be pretty productive in terms of being able to quickly measure and move on to the next point. When I started my career, going back probably 35 years soil sampling, back then we did not have GPSs, we did not have we had maps, we could see where we were in the field, but it wasn't terribly accurate in terms of knowing where you're putting your points and choosing the right spots. The same rules apply today, where we're trying to stay off the extreme highs and the extreme depressions of the field. We're trying to capture kind of the mid-range average areas, because that's what the bulk of the acres are. We're on some heavy clay soils in the Red River Valley. Like I mentioned, we are a little bit east of Dugald. We're on a floodplain here. It's Osborne clay soils. It's coring very, very well. The top inch or two is a little bit of powder, so sometimes we have to make a judgment call in terms of having the right depths. But one of the big things that's made this a lot easier is having tablets where you can see yourself driving around the field on a map. So this is extremely important when we're doing zone sampling. Right now we are just collecting composite points. So what that means is composite sampling, we're taking an average of the field. So it's one set of samples that will be sent to the lab. So I mentioned we're splitting it 0 to 6 and then 6 to 24. So we mix all of those together and it makes a composite sample. Zone sampling is when we'll try to split the field off into management zones. And most of the times these management zones are based on productivity in the field. So they're based on yield maps, satellite imagery, topography. There's electrical conductivity, that is another layer. It's all in terms of trying to differentiate and group areas of the field together, because there's a lot of variability that happens within the field. Even here, where it's pretty consistent in the amount of clay that we have, topsoil versus the subsoil, there is still a lot of variability. Most of it is topography driven, so depending on where the water ponds or where the ridges or the hills, and what we call ridges might only be 10 inches different in elevation, 2 feet, something like that. Like, it's not a very big difference. It's pretty subtle, but it's still, it sheds water versus the depression areas that'll hold water. Where we run into trouble here is because we have these heavy clay soils. They're very slow to let the water through, so it tends to pond and sit on top for the longest time. And that is, it poses a problem. It's caused a lot of variability over the last 10,000 years. Why do I say 10,000 years? That's when the last ice age started retreating. So these soils have been forming over the last 10,000 years. The ridges have always shed water. The depressional areas have always held water. So what that ended up causing was the depression areas have a much deeper profile of topsoil. So if you imagine the water, we'd get these big rain events, it would sit in these depression areas and slowly percolate into the ground all summer. So where we typically get the bulk of our rains kind of May, June, or the first half of the growing season, the second half tends to be drier. These areas would slowly recharge throughout the whole season and fill those depression areas, or develop those depression areas. Fast forward to when we started farming it about 120, 130 years ago. Back then there was no such thing as fertilizers. We were cultivating the land. That was our main form of weed control. We needed often to let the plant or the land rest, which we call that summer fallow. So essentially you would only grow a crop every 2 years maybe. The reason that you were doing this is to let plant residue decompose to let nitrogen mineralize out, let the microbes do their work so that you can grow a crop again. That all changed with synthetic fertilizers, but what happened was basically you kept the fields black to keep the weeds in check. Well, what ended up happening is it would get dry, these fine clay soils would then start blowing in the wind, and we had very heavy erosion problems. Whether it would be heavy rainfall events, heavy wind events, you know, it's a lot of these ridges, because there was already limited organic matter, right? If you think about the water always shedding off of it, it doesn't support as much plant life. You're growing less biomass, you're incorporating less biomass. They already had a very shallow topsoil to begin with. Throw in erosion on top of that, and it doesn't, mechanical wind and water, it doesn't take long before there's a lot less topsoil on these ridges, and they become much less productive. So you'll often see and often hear us refer to yellow clay ridges. Yellow clays are the parent material, they're highly calcareous. That's our subsoil that we have out here that we're dealing with. When I stop at a hole, I'm brushing away any kind of little bit of organic matter or plant residue on the top. So traditionally, soil sampling was usually done later in the season, before fall freeze up or before applying fertilizer. The reasons for doing this is you wanted to capture all of the mineralized nitrogen, but what we've come to realize is it doesn't give us as accurate a sample when if we're for the 0 to 6, so the nutrients that don't move around much. We'd rather go behind the combine before the soil is disturbed. That's what I'm doing right now. So right now the field is pretty smooth, but all of the residue from this year's crop is on top. So we brush a little bit of that away. The reason we do that, we don't want to capture that in the soil sample because that will cause a problem with some of the nutrient readings. When the samples go to the lab, they dry them out, they grind them, and then they take their measurements off of that. So something especially like organic matter can seriously be affected by having too many roots and stems and leaves and chaff in the samples. So we try to brush those off as best we can so that we can get a more consistent sample from year to year. There's a lot of zero tillers out there that say, oh, I've drastically improved my soil, raised up the organic matter by 8-9% over the course of 10-15 years. Well, that what we're measuring often is because you get that mat of residue on top, you're not incorporating it, so it's slower to break down. When we do an organic matter test at the lab, they basically put it in an oven at 400 degrees and cook off all of the carbon. So then that is considered your organic matter. Well, if you've got roots and plant material, that's not true organic matter, at least not yet. That's what we're burning off, and that's what we're considering organic matter. Don't get me wrong, it is technically organic matter. It is beneficial to your soil, but it's not the stuff that gives you the big release of nutrients or that helps hold a lot of water in the soils. It does allow more water to infiltrate, having good tilth. You get less bulk density, less compaction, but it's not the same thing. So we try to brush that stuff off. This is a 135 acre field. We've got 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15 points. So that is pretty much it for this field. The lab that we work with is AgVise, and they provide us a system of stickers with barcodes to make things easier at the lab. We just have to find the right ones. And then, remember I mentioned they only use a couple spoonfuls of dried soil. Once it's dry, they grind it up. This bag is all that they need at their end. So we put the sticker on there, and then we make sure that we put topsoil with topsoil, and then subsoil with subsoil. And that is it for this field. We tie off the bags and off to the next one. So I'm going to hit pause and we'll catch you in the next field.